Hey guys, in this month's Historical Fiction 101, I'm going to be sharing some book recommendations that involve characters that work in the medical profession. So, the medical profession, the world of medicine, that can be just about anything. So, there's a broad range of books that I think I kind of have in this list of recommendations. Yeah, a good majority of the books feature traditional nurses, people in the nursing field. But then I do have like a couple books that feature characters like maybe in the field of psychology, because that's still like a medical profession of some sort. So yeah, it's kind of a broad range of anybody who works in the medical profession, whether that's a doctor, a nurse, someone in the field of psychiatry, whatever. So yeah. I have 10 recommendations here that I'm going to be sharing with you guys. Well, let's get going. And as always, I'm going to be reading off of the book synopsises on Goodreads. So if you want to pull up your Goodreads right now as I'm going through these synopsises, feel free to add them to your TBR. First up, The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. I'm not quite sure how that one's pronounced, but I know it was made into a popular movie back in, I think, the 90s, and I think Ray Fiennes was in it, if I'm not mistaken. But either way, The English Patient. Let's see. It's saying that this book traces the intersection of four damaged lives in an abandoned Italian villa at the end of World War II. The nurse, Hannah, exhausted by death, obsessively tends to her last surviving patient. Caravaggio, the thief, tries to reimagine who he is, now that his hands are hopelessly maimed. The Indian sapper, Kip, searches for hidden bombs in a landscape where nothing is safe but himself. And at the center of this labyrinth lives the English patient, nameless and hideously burned, a man who is both a riddle and a provocation to his companions, and whose memories of suffering, rescue, and betrayal illuminate this book like flashes of heat lightning. Next up, The Alienist by Caleb Carr. The year is 1896, the place New York City. On a cold March night, New York Times reporter John Moore is summoned to the East River by his friend and former Harvard classmate Dr. Laszlo Kreisler, a psychologist or alienist. On the unfinished Williamsburg Bridge, they view the horribly mutated body of an adolescent boy, a prostitute from one of Manhattan's infamous brothels. The newly appointed police commissioner, Theodore Roosevelt, in a highly unorthodox move, enlists the two men in the murder investigation. Counting on the reserved Chrysler's intellect and Moore's knowledge of New York's vast criminal underworld, they are joined by Sarah Howard, a brave and determined woman who works as a secretary in the police department. Laboring in secret, for alienists and the emerging discipline of psychology are viewed by the public with skepticism at best. The unlikely team embarks on what is a revolutionary effort in criminology, amassing a psychological profile of the man they're looking for based on the details of his crimes. Their dangerous quest takes them into the tortured past and twisted mind of a murderer who has killed before and will kill again before the hunt is over. Next up, Midwives by Chris Bahjalian. I am never going to learn how to pronounce this man's name. The time is 1981, and Sybil Danforth has been a dedicated midwife in the rural community of Reddington, Vermont, for 15 years. But one treacherous winter night in a house isolated by icy roads and failed telephone lines, Sybil takes desperate measures to save a baby's life. She performs an emergency C-section on its mother, who appears to have died in labor. But what if, as Sybil's assistant later charges, the patient wasn't already dead, and it was Sybil who inadvertently killed her? As recounted by Sybil's precocious 14-year-old daughter, Connie, the ensuing trial bears the earmarks of a witch hunt, except for the fact that all its participants are acting from the highest motives, and the defendant increasingly appears to be guilty. As Sybil Danforth faces the antagonism of the law, the hostility of traditional doctors, and the accusations of her own conscience, Midwives engages, moves, and transfixes us as only the very best novels ever do. Next up, the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. The year is 1945. Claire Randall, a former combat nurse, is just back from the war and reunited with her husband on a second honeymoon when she walks through a standing stone in one of the ancient circles that dot the British Isles. Suddenly, she is a Sassenach, an outsider, in a Scotland torn by war and raiding war clans in the year of our Lord, 1743. Hurried back in time by forces she cannot understand, Claire is catapulted into the intrigues of lairds and spies that may threaten her life and shatter her heart. For here, James Fraser, a gallant young Scots warrior, shows her a love so absolute that Claire becomes a woman torn between fidelity and desire, and between two vastly different men and two irreconcilable lives. And just to kind of stress more the Outlander series, it's a time travel series essentially. I really like this series because our main character Claire, she is a former nurse, and she uses that knowledge. You know, she's from the 1900s and she goes back to the 1700s, and yeah, every book she uses kind of her knowledge to help people and kind of give them advancements in medical technology almost that perhaps you shouldn't be giving them, you know, like antibiotics, and hey, you got to use warm water and soap to wash your hands, you know. So I love how her being a nurse from the 1900s really plays quite wonderfully into this series, you know, as she's thrown back into the 1700s. It's really great. Next up, The Mad Women's Ball by Victoria Maz. Paris, 1885. Dr. Charcot holds all of Paris in thrall with his displays of hypnotism on women who have been deemed mad and cast out from society. But the truth is much more complicated. These women are often simply inconvenient, unwanted wives, those who have lost something precious, wayward daughters, or girls born from adulterous relationships. For Parisian society, the highlight of the year is the Lenten Ball, the Mad Women's Ball, when the great and good come to gawk at the patients, dressed up in their finery for one night only. For the women themselves, it is a rare moment of hope. Genevieve is a senior nurse. After the childhood death of her sister, she shunned religion and placed her faith in both the celebrated psychiatrist Dr. Charcot and science. But everything begins to change when she meets Eugenie, the 19-year-old daughter of a bourgeois family that has locked her away in the asylum. Because Eugenie has a secret. She sees spirits. Inspired by the scandalous banned book that all of Paris is talking about, the Book of Spirits, Eugenie is determined to escape from the asylum and the bonds of her gender, and seek out those who will believe in her, and for that she will need Genevieve's help. Next up, Elias Grace by Margaret Atwood. Grace Marks has been convicted for her involvement in the vicious murders of her employer, Thomas Kinnear, and Nancy Montgomery, his housekeeper and mistress. Some believe Grace is innocent, others think her evil or insane. Now serving a life sentence, Grace claims to have no memory of the murders. Dr. Simon Jordan, an up-and-coming expert in the burgeoning field of mental illness, is engaged by a group of reformers and spiritualists who seek a pardon for Grace. He listens to her story while bringing her closer and closer to the days she cannot remember. What will he find in attempting to unlock her memories? Is Grace a female fiend, a bloodthirsty femme fatale, or is she the victim of circumstance? Next up, The Gilded Hour by Sarah Donati. The year is 1883, New York City. It's a time of dizzying splendor, crushing poverty, and tremendous change. With the gravity-defying Brooklyn Bridge nearly complete and New York in the grips of anti-vice crusader Anthony Comstock, Anna Savard and her cousin Sophie, both graduates of the Women's Medical School, treat the city's most vulnerable, even if doing so may put everything they've strived for in jeopardy. Anna's work has placed her in the path of 4 children who have lost everything, just as she herself once had. Faced with their helplessness, Anna must make an unexpected choice between holding on to the pain of her past and letting love into her life. For Sophie, an obstetrician, and the orphan daughter of free people of color, helping a desperate young mother forces her to grapple with the oath that she took as a doctor, and thrusts her and Anna into the orbit of Anthony Comstock, a dangerous man who considers himself the enemy of everything indecent and of anyone who dares to defy him. Next up, The War Nurse by Tracy Anderson Wood. Superintendent of Nurses Julia Stimson must recruit 65 nurses to relieve the battle-worn British months before American troops are ready to be deployed. She knows that the young nurses serving near the front lines will face a challenging situation, but nothing could have prepared her for the chaos that awaits when they arrive at British Base Hospital 12 in ruined France. The primitive conditions, a convoluted, ineffective system, and horrific battle wounds are enough to discourage the most hardened nurses, and Julie can do nothing but lead by example, even as the military doctors undermine her authority and make her question her very place in the hospital tent. When trainloads of soldiers stricken by a mysterious respiratory illness arrive one after the other, overwhelming the hospital's limited resources and threatening the health of her staff, Julia faces an unthinkable choice: to step outside the bounds of her profession and risk the career she has fought so hard for, or to watch the people she cares for most die in her arms. Next, The Woman at the Front by Lucia Cornwall. When Eleanor Atherton Graduates from medical school near the top of her class in 1917, she dreams of going overseas to help the wounded, but her ambition is thwarted at every turn. Eleanor's parents insist she must give up medicine, marry a respectable man, and assume her proper place. While women might serve as ambulance drivers or nurses at the front, they cannot be physicians. That work is too dangerous and frightening. Nevertheless, Eleanor is determined to make more of a contribution than sitting at home knitting for the troops. When an unexpected twist of fate sends Eleanor to the battlefields of France as the private doctor of a British peer, she seizes the opportunity for what is the chance to finally prove herself. But there's a war on, and a casualty clearing station close to the front lines is an unforgiving place. Facing skeptical commanders who question her skills, scores of wounded men needing care, underhanded efforts by her family to bring her back home, and a blossoming romance, Eleanor must decide if she's brave enough to break the rules, face her darkest fears, and take the chance to win the career and the love she's always wanted. And last, Angels of the Pacific by Elise Hooper. The Philippines in 1941, Tess Abbott, an American Army nurse, has fled the hardships of the Great Depression at home for the glamour and adventure of Manila, one of the most desirable postings in the world. But everything changes when the Japanese Imperial Army invades with lightning speed and devastating results. Tess and her band of nurses serve on the front lines until captured as prisoners of war and held behind the high stone walls of Manila's Santo Tomas internment camp for 4 long years. As the Japanese occupation of her beloved homeland commences, Flor Dallas, a Filipina university student, will be drawn into the underground network of resistance and discover reserves of courage, resilience, and leadership she never knew she possessed. The war and its aftermath will lead Tess and Flor to find each other, to uncover secrets, and reveal relationships they would never have predicted as they work together to defeat the Japanese. So you guys, that is it for my book recommendations in historical fiction that feature characters somewhere within the medical field. So yeah, you guys, in the comments below, what other books should I check out that feature, doctors or nurses or, anybody like in psychology or midwives, whatever. It could be anything, anything that requires some sort of medical know-how, Just give me some further book recommendations down below. So that's it for this video. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you like this video, you may like these other videos. Bye, guys.